So yeah, first welcome everyone to join this webinar. So during our last forum panel meeting, we have one session discussing the impact of model resolution on prediction and projections. So we invited three speakers to talk about the three models, CESM, E3SM, and Jeff-Spear models. And that model basically is a resolution from around 100 to 25 kilometer. So they presented lots of interesting results, and but also with lots of questions. So today we want to continue this discussion about the model resolution and predictions. So we are very happy to invite Dr. Andrew Gettelman to give us this presentation. Andrew got his PhD from the University of Washington back to 1999. And he was a senior scientist at NCAR and now moved to PNNL, right? Yeah. Andrew is an expert on regional and global climate modeling, and his research covers a wide range of areas, including like microphysics, aerosol, cloud, climate sensitivity, as well as predictions. It's really amazing. I don't know how you can manage so many things. He is also a co-chair of this WCRP Digital Earth Lighthouse activity. That is one of the 5 WCRP Lighthouse activities. So today, Andrew is going to give us a talk about this Digital Earth, and also give us some updates on this recent ultra high resolution modeling workshop in October. Yeah, Andrew, please take it away.
Okay, thanks, Bao. And I think hopefully I will be able to answer Sanju's question. So let me see. Hang on. First, I gotta figure out how to share my screen. There we go. Let me share. So I'm going to talk about digital twins and try to explain what they are and how they're related to high resolution modeling and sort of the promise of this sort of convection level permitting modeling for prediction and predictability. As Bao said, I'm sort of co-leading this Digital Earth Lighthouse activity for the World Climate Research Program with Christian Jakob at Monash University in Australia. And the picture on the right actually, of course, is not a satellite image. That's actually a 4-kilometer global model. It happens to be from the MPAS atmosphere model from the NCAR contributions to the Diamond simulation. So that is the level of realism that we're sort of approaching with a lot of our modeling systems. So what I want to talk about is a motivation for this, actually define and describe what a digital twin is. And a digital Earth is basically a digital twin of the Earth. I'll describe the Lighthouse activity and what we're doing, and then I'll go into detail on this workshop for kilometer scale models with some of the key science and technical issues involved. And I'll talk about a little about our progress and a page or so on thoughts for what that means for prediction and some of the key things for next steps. So basically, that climate prediction requires basically us knowing the future weather. And what that means is we're sort of taking climate variability and climate change and putting it on top of all these weather systems. And the motivation for that is to actually not so much for the sake of just understanding climate, but for also understanding the applications and the impacts on humanity, which are largely sort of food, water, and energy, and also ecosystems. There we go. Right now, our current tools are pretty inadequate. So just this is an image of Australia, and 100-kilometer orography is on the top and 5-kilometer orography is on the bottom. You see it's much more realistic. The other interesting aspect of this is that while global climate models are very good, Earth system models, if you look at things like the rainfall errors, this is sort of the mean rainfall, and this is the bias in the rainfall. And this is the change in rainfall projected for 2-degree warming. the projected changes are on the order of 40%. And if you look at the bias, these numbers get up to sort of 8 to 10, and the bias gets up to about 3. The bias is almost the same magnitude as the change. So it's not clear that we're getting skillful predictions because we're not getting skillful predictions in the present in these models. So we need sort of new modeling approaches to build global models that start to resolve these weather scales and also try to solve this problem of these sort of large scale failures that we're having. And that's sort of a dual aspect of building these these higher resolution systems, and they're systems that are actually digital twins. So again, the pile of 11 different things that look like a satellite image is actually 10 different models in one observation. This is again from the Diamond simulation. So this is a paper by Bjorn Stevens and collaborators. And when you start to get down to the kilometer scale, you can start to do some pretty interesting stuff. So for example, on the lower left is the Gulf Stream visualized at 1 kilometer. So you can see all the eddies and swirls and different levels of the thermocline and different temperatures. You can actually do sea ice modeling where you're actually getting leads in the sea ice modeling. And you can start to represent fields of thunderstorms with multiple updrafts and the actual organization of convection and convective clouds at these scales. We also need to couple this with observing systems to provide the relevant weather information to baseline our models and start to actually control our models, be able to do a range of different climate scales. So this is sort of an image here of the atmospheric system, which ranges from ground-based to aircraft, all the way into satellites, ranging from traditional satellite platforms to things like CubeSats. And then in the ocean, we have a whole different, and other parts of the Earth, we have a whole different set of observations from ships, buoys, some remote sensing, dropsondes, and floats in the ocean. And again, we have to do this on a variety of timescales because what we're really interested in is looking at details of things like wind and sunlight for energy systems. And then the other big challenge of that, of course, is rainfall, either too little or in this case, too much. And so getting the ability to baseline this information is important. And a lot of our models don't operate at the scale of our observations. And at least for weather purposes, they don't even ingest the observations. The weather radars for the United States, for example, don't actually do anything really in the forecast model. They're just sort of used as verification, and they're used for nowcasting. But we don't assimilate that information. We assimilate broad scale cloud information. So what we need to do is to merge these observations and models. Some of this is through data assimilation, and it's constraining the system to do a range of prediction, both for traditional weather scales and also extending out to the climate scale. So it goes from an observation system through an assimilation and modeling system to actually get usable predictions that are useful for people. So another way to look at this is basically showing a whole integrated system where you start with a series of observations where you see parts of the Earth in sort of black and white. So you see certain limited amounts of wavelengths, and you take all these signals, you build retrievals. These retrievals go into assimilation systems that then provide a sort of multispectral, multi-parameter view of the Earth. Some of that you're bringing in empirical models into those and then geophysical models. Those models are used for applications and prediction. That is sort of this digital twin, which is this integrated system. And then that twin itself can be used to simulate the observations, and this becomes a cycle. So you can actually use it to improve the observations. You can use the observation simulators to understand where the modeling is actually failing. So, or where the biases are in a more integrated way, in a more process level way, because you're actually tracking them over time. So it's this real model data fusion that's one aspect of the digital twin. And again, it's integrating these climate knowledge into these societal information systems. So it's coupling with these applications models here. And these applications models are for things like hydrology and water, energy, health, food and agriculture. They can also be economic. So it's a digital twin is a global interactive information system that can do hindcasts, but it also can do forecasts of the planet on different states and different timescales. And it's integrated with models of our human systems and the related and the detailed Earth systems around us that are most important for human systems. So that's things like energy and water, especially.
Hey,
So,
Andrew.
Yep.
I'm sorry, just a quick question here. I'm trying to differentiate the concept of the digital twin from just traditional reanalyses or initialized forecasts, because they sound
Right. So
similar.
let me give you some examples.
Okay, sorry.
It's similar.
Thanks.
but it's this coupling with the human system, and it's what it's actually used for. So a digital twin, and this comes from IBM, is a virtual representation of an object or system that spans its life cycle, is updated from data, and uses simulation and other tools to help out decision making. So this comes generally from engineering, and has started to be extended. So you can start with a virtual model of a jet engine, and unlike just a CAD drawing of an engine, a digital twin includes the ability to run a CFD simulation, the computational fluid dynamics, that would tell you what the engine's performance are, and to adapt the engine itself to give a better performance on the fly before you actually construct the engine. So for a structure, it goes beyond the blueprints, but you would be able to simulate the HVAC systems and try to optimize their efficiency and the indoor air quality even before you build a building. For manufacturing operations, again, you're not just talking about blueprints, but you're talking for a factory, but you're talking about integrating the product design to the production to the packaging, so you can kind of simulate an end-to-end system. You can then extend that to doing something like urban planning, where you're looking at the physical state of a city and also looking at the human aspects of how the humans use that city and the resulting impacts, whether they be water, pollution, traffic, and how to optimize those. So particularly from the last example, you can see there's not a big jump to Earth system models by the time you're simulating a city, and it has the human component in it. So I think the two differences from a traditional Earth system model is the level of integration with data, where data is used to inform the system and data is used to improve the system, and then also the use of applications models for decision making in the system. Does that help answer the question? Why it's different?
I think so. Yeah, I think you can keep going. I might see other examples that help clarify it further.
Right, we can keep talking about it, but it is basically, you could argue that a reanalysis system is a prototype or is one version of essentially a digital twin of the Earth, right? Because we ingest the data and we produce a forecast. But what we're not doing it in a comprehensive way is we use that for decision making, but we probably need to couple the applications with it, and we need to push it out to longer timescales so we can do it for climate. And that's sort of what a digital twin is, also thinking about it as an end-to-end system where we're using a similar system across scales of prediction as well. So this Lighthouse activity is for the World Climate Research Program. It sort of sits across all the different entities and different elements of the WCRP. One of these is the WCRP Academy, which is sort of a training and education. There's the Safe Landing Climates, some climate risk and global change. And then there's Digital Earth, which is really sort of it's actually a development exercise. Our goal is supporting the research for the Lighthouse that supports the design and building of these interactive integrated digital information systems, providing global and regional information on the past, present, and future of the planet, including both natural and human systems. Three main areas of activity are these kilometer scale regional and global models, which is what most people can get their head around most easily. It's a global research network with experience in this kilometer scale modeling of the Earth system and the individual components. So it's definitely a coupled system. A second aspect of that is data simulation for climate, which is thinking about data simulation not just in terms of weather research, but what is needed in numerical prediction to actually, with reanalysis efforts, to actually improve our ability to make models and predict the climate in the future. And then the third piece is going beyond the physical system, and it's this digital twin aspect of linking to applications and interactions with human systems with Earth system models. So it's essentially taking kind of the framework of reanalysis and extending that to sort of realize more full potential, particularly for climate and particularly for prediction. So what progress do we have? We had this major workshop in October, just a month or so ago, 65 people in person, 30 online, with this kilometer scale modeling community. And I'll talk a lot about that, basically across the physical system, across the different components of the Earth system. It's not just the atmosphere. We had a workshop in May on data simulation, going beyond traditional DA and discussing what you actually want to assimilate if you're thinking more in terms of climate for hindcasts or for sort of initializing climate models going forward for longer term prediction. And that's led by Anish Subramanian at University of Colorado. And then the third piece is going beyond the physical system. We're building bridges to different communities. likely starting with things like hydroclimate modeling, these regional hydroclimate projects, and then also the EasyMap intersectoral model intercomparison project that does sort of already takes reanalysis data, downscales it, and tries to run impact models on it in various sectors. Going beyond the physical system, I'm not going to talk too much about, but water is sort of a good place to start because water is one of those things that we have to define pretty explicitly in the climate system, and we're pretty good at moving it around and conserving it and tracking it and simulating it. It also is critically important for humans, and it also has a very definitive dollar value. So it links to human systems in a number of ways and is vitally important, but it's also one of the easier things for us to actually do in our Earth system models and track. So the goals of this, at least this first piece, this kilometer scale modeling workshop, were to bring modelers of different communities together. And that's the atmosphere, the ocean, the land, the ice, but also crossing scales from regional to global. The regional climate modeling and the global climate modeling community don't often talk to each other very much, which is very interesting. We're trying to identify common and unique scientific and computational issues faced by different groups when moving to ultra high resolution. And by ultra high resolution and kilometer scale, we're pretty much talking about things that are 5 kilometers and less. And I'll show some examples of why that's the case. And then we're discussing applications and use of ultra high resolution global models, what we already know works and doesn't, sharing progress in this ultra high resolution modeling, and identifying the key challenges and joint community tasks. So we are finalizing a report and recommendations. We did some preliminary discussion of that at the WGNE and WGCM meetings last week. And then I think there's going to be a report out, which we're finalizing now. So this is a map of where these activities are actually occurring. So we identified about 22 different efforts, and there are more. We're getting in some more groups as this goes through the grapevine. 12 of these are global efforts, 10 are regional. 2/3 of these groups attended virtually in person. It's not necessarily 22 unique modeling efforts because some of these things are pan-European, or they represent, like the Department of Energy, which has a number of different, or NOAA, which has a number of different sites in the United States. But you can see it is spread out, and it's not just the usual suspects. There are a couple, obviously some efforts in Asia, but there are a few regional efforts where people are pushing regional climate modeling to fairly high resolution in parts of the global south, particularly in Argentina, Brazil, and in South Africa. And we've been interacting with those groups also and trying to understand their needs and how they can play in this in the system and their needs for information. So some of the key science issues I wanted to cover are that these kilometer scale global and regional models should learn from established mesoscale model developers. We need to build better teams. So having been exploring the space and trying to get NCAR's global modeling system to work at these scales, it's really funny because as a global climate modeler and developer, I don't really know what I'm doing at these scales because I'm not used to simulating weather. And there's people who've been doing this for 25 years or more at these scales, and we need to talk to them. And we're starting to do that, and we learn lots of things really fast. And that's the way to basically bring along our global models so they work at this sort of mesoscale and convective permitting scale. There are key science issues in the atmosphere when we do this. The organization intensity of deep convection at 1 to 4 kilometers, shallow convection at 4 to kilometers down to 100 meters, and extratropical storms. We need to collaborate with GWEX and GAS and some of the atmospheric system study people that have been using small scale models and working at some of these scales. It's interesting because when we deal with climate and global models, we hit regimes that mesoscale models haven't really worried about too much. Shallow clouds over the ocean are not a big target of many mesoscale models because they don't kill anybody and they don't impact a lot of people. Whereas deep convection over land is obviously something that's gotten a lot of attention in these modeling systems. We also need to engage the kilometer scale ocean and sea ice communities, such as the Clivar Ocean Model Development Panel and CLIC for sea ice. And there's definitely a lot of activity in the space, particularly with the sea ice, just because the dynamics involved and the scales. There's been a lot of regional work at this scale in the ocean. Global scale has been harder, but that's coming along. And we've also identified that these models could have a big and relatively short-term impact in improving hydrology simulations, coupling to water at the surface. We need to engage with existing land modeling efforts such as GLASS and the Global Hydroclimate projects, and then regional hydroclimate projects to improve hydrology in a lot of these land models. There's also, it's interesting because when you talk to land models, a lot of the land model developers I've talked to for the global climate context, like traditional CMIP type models, they haven't been as interested in high resolution. And it took me a while to understand why a lot of people that I thought would be or should be interested in high resolution are not. And I think it's because from a climate perspective, the land is mostly important for carbon. And you want to understand carbon feedbacks and what the long-term evolution of the land surface is to understand how it processes carbon, to understand how it feeds back on the atmosphere. And water is a part of that, but it's less of a part of that than most of us would actually think, I would thought. So that's an interesting challenge in getting some of the people that have traditionally worked on these models to think more about hydrology in the simulations. The other interesting thing is that most of the time when we speak of human impacts, we're not talking about the whole planet all the time. Usually we're talking about, even with sectoral and applications impacts, we're usually talking about at most something like a continent. And what that means is many of these results at these sort of kilometer scales at 1 to 5 kilometers could probably be achieved with regional models. And the global modelers, we should probably get off our high horse and think we're better than everybody else because we can do this all globally, everywhere, all the time, because we really can't afford to get the right number of ensembles, the right length of simulations. It's going to be decades before we get there. So let's figure out what we really need to do at the global scale or what we can do at the regional scale. And one of the big questions about why you would want a global uniform 4 kilometer model is what do you need to do at this fine resolution to actually feed back onto the larger scale circulation? Because if it doesn't feed back onto the large scale circulation and you run one of these models and get the same biases in precipitation that I just showed earlier that you get at 100 kilometers, then why waste all the computing power? I mean, yes, if you increase resolution, you'll get much better topography and much better orographic precipitation. But if the large scale simulation still has biases, that's really an issue. And so we need to understand that. Can we actually make some of those long-standing biases go away? That's been some of the promise. And then do we need to do that all the time, or can we learn that from those models and actually apply that to our lower resolution models that we can use more practically for a lot of things, or models that are global, fully coupled, but only refine in one region? So you do a global Earth system model with 100 kilometer resolution, but you can refine it to 4 kilometer resolution over a continent of interest, for example, because that already is an order of magnitude faster than trying, or more, several orders of magnitude faster than trying to do it globally at those resolutions, at fine resolution. So some emerging themes in this context also were prediction and representation of extremes, including precipitation. That seems to get better in the atmosphere at 4 kilometers or less. I'll show some examples of things like atmospheric rivers and also mesoscale convective systems. Critical features are emerging in other spheres, such as the ocean and ice. I'll show some quick images of that. And then what's interesting is we are struggling at 4 kilometers to reproduce extreme features in the tropics, for example. And even I think some of the results that have been shown in mid-latitude are maybe not correct for the right reasons. And again, this key question, do we need these global digital twins, small scale, so that the small scale qualitatively and quantitatively affects the general circulation, or is regional refinement and a regional domain actually sufficient to do the problems that we need? So here's just an example. This is with the NCAR model. So this is CESM MPAS. So it's traditional Earth system model, CESM, but it's using a non-hydrostatic dynamical core, the model for prediction across scales that's typically used in a mesoscale model. And we're running it 3 kilometers over the domain shown here. It's a global model. It's 60 kilometers over the rest of the planet and 3 kilometers here. And you can see this is just showing seasonal. We've run it seasonally. This is seasonal average precipitation in the winter. So this is the model here with CESM MPAS. These are gridded prism observations at 4 kilometers. You can clearly see all the orographic precipitation in the Western United States. And this is a WRF simulation in a regional climate mode at 4 kilometers that's sort of initialized and run for a season with boundary conditions and reanalysis for about 4 years. And what you can actually see is that if you look at the headline numbers, we're actually doing a lot better in CESM related to the precipitation. There's an overprediction of the orographic precipitation in MPAS. This is actually a better distribution. And then if you look at the intensity, the black line is the observations, the red line is the global model. It actually is doing a better job in the intensity. So we're actually capturing the observed PDF of precipitation better than a mesoscale model, especially for extreme precipitation. And this is for sort of seasonal stuff over the Western United States. This is another example of what mesoscale convective systems over the UK look like. This is observations. This is a model over the United Kingdom from the Met Office at 1.5 kilometers, and this is their global model forecast system at 25 kilometers. That is definitely qualitatively different in the forecast. And if you're in London at this time, you definitely want to know that you've got this sort of extreme weather happening, not this light rain that's occurring basically in the large scale global model. So this is work from Andy Prine, and what's interesting is there does seem to be a scale break in atmospheric models at this grid scale, the sort of gray scale or terra incognita between 10 kilometers and 250 meters. This is running at the mesoscale limit at about 12 kilometers with a deep convective parameterization. This is sort of simulations of a mesoscale convective complex. And what you can see is the evolution of essentially a single updraft in the system. And it's single updraft, and it's very uniform in the upper level cloud shield, and you don't see a lot of the organization or features, and it propagates relatively rapidly. If you go to 4 kilometers, all of a sudden, you're now resolving. You can clearly see essentially the development of cold pool. You can see multiple updrafts, and also the propagation of the system is qualitatively different. It's moving in a slightly different direction and with a different speed as it evolves due to the convective organization. What's interesting is taking this further, and now this is 1 kilometer. Again, more detail and especially more detail and less uniformity in the upper level cloud shield and resolution of the cold pool, but this does look qualitatively similar. And you can go all the way down to 250 meters. And again, a lot more heterogeneity in the system, similar sets of updrafts, similar description of the cold pool. So essentially what they found, and using other statistics, is that by the time you got to 4 kilometers, you really didn't need much of a deep convection scheme, and you could sort of explicitly resolve multiple updrafts and get the right propagation and evolution of these systems at that scale. And this is just some other things. So this is looking at atmospheric temperature and mixed layer depth in a high resolution 2.5 kilometer ocean atmosphere coupled system. So this is actually kind of neat. You can see how the weather systems are actually, if you see the diurnal pulse of the diurnal pulse of the diurnal cycle, and then you can see all the eddies and evolution of the Gulf Stream in the Atlantic on various timescales, and looking at the essentially how it affects the mixed layer and how the atmosphere actually stirs up and modifies the ocean. And then this is just a snapshot of a 1 kilometer sea ice model. So at this scale, you can actually reproduce explicitly leads and gaps in the sea ice due to sort of stress fracturing the motion of the ice. They may be a little larger than observed, but it does provide a qualitatively different simulation of how the ice actually moves and evolves, which is pretty fundamental and very interesting for a lot of the work that's happening. And then land modeling across scales, basically we're trying to get down to the watershed level. And this is just from a recent article, in Process the History of GWEX, where we're actually getting to being able to model hill slopes, disturbances, and particularly how groundwater flows into surface water, and the evolution of the hydrology in a much more realistic way than sort of simple bucket hydrology approaches, that the water can actually be directed and feed back on the system in important ways. So finishing up with a few more slides, a few technical issues. One of the interesting things about this data is when you start running these simulations, even regionally at these resolutions, the data starts to get large enough, you really can't move it around. And you pretty much have to analyze this kilometer scale model output at the location of the data. So for example, you can't, even what happens now with CMIP, where there's a whole bunch of different nodes and you can access the data off the different nodes from the Earth System Grid Federation, download it onto another system, or use it on somebody's computer and analyze it in situ. You can't download this data. It's difficult to move around. The Diamond simulations have one common data center, which has collected all of it, but that's 40 days of simulation. They can't hold much more than that for the 10 models that they actually have. However, most people actually have now web access through things like Jupyter Hub servers to get Python analysis packages working on the data in the data center. And you can actually do that at a number of different centers. So for a lot of people in the US, it's fairly easy to access NCAR Center. There's one in the UK, the Jasmine system that holds a lot of this data, and then it's the DKRZ in Germany. And all those are pretty much accessible by people even from other countries if you go through the right channels to actually be able to look at this data. So one thought is that we might be able to think about a way we can federate access to that, so that if you have one login authorized on one of these systems, you can at least do the analysis that you need on other systems. And that is advantageous because it only requires basically web access. Doesn't require you high bandwidth or high computing power at your local center. Of course, that just has to be funded in some way. Right now, that's a small community, but it may be possible to fund, but it's not clear how this all scales. We do need to invest in the human workforce for model infrastructure. There, as people have pointed out, there are opportunities here because this puts us at the cutting edge of computing where it gets more interesting to people. And it also gets interesting to some of the companies involved in this, but of course they have their own priorities. Well, a lot of this data set access is open access, and the analysis tools are open source, which is great. And there's an active development in the sort of space of using Python and Python packages and do all this in an open source context. But open source is not free. It needs to be supported and maintained and kept freely available. And we need to encourage people to recognize that open source is not free, and to do this right and to share it with people actually costs money. To have the right people doing support and to have the right computer science support and software engineering support to do this, so that people actually have the time and also the incentive to actually work on open source projects, and that they get rewarded for that. We also need to encourage collaboration and sharing of techniques for new architectures, things like graphical processing unit accelerators, coupling infrastructure, and even ported code, such as sharing model physics across scales using more common interfaces. So just a slide on links to the human scale. This is from Tim Schneider, who's helping lead the development of a regional hydroclimate project in the United States. These regional hydroclimate projects are large, regionally focused, multidisciplinary projects to improve understanding prediction of the region's weather, climate, hydrology. These are built-in communities that we can start to actually intersect with and think about providing better modeling tools and better prediction tools to them, as well as getting feedback to make sure that our tools are up to the job that they actually want to do. So some final thoughts on what this means. Simulating weather under climate change is critical for societal adaptation. This is kind of the end member for seamless prediction. You go from weather scales to seasonal scale, sub-seasonal scales to seasonal, into decadal, and then you're into the scenario scale. But we need to do weather on all these scales, and we need to do it at high resolution because these high resolution models are critical for the extremes. And the digital twin is linking those models to Earth system data, constraining them in different ways, and providing a pathway to both improve the data, figure out what data is needed to most improve the models where they're most uncertain, and also to correct model biases. And then the societal applications, both offline and inline. So some of this can be done with data that's stored, but there's some applications where you may want to run them inline where things may feed back. So for example, if you change the way that you use the land surface over a continental scale, say in South America with forests and agriculture, or with irrigation in North America, you will potentially change the climate in the extremes, and we need to be able to understand that. So that may require running some of these models in line, actually, but many of them can be done offline as well. And then I think it's understanding where the large scale climate prediction requires 4-kilometer scales to work more effectively. And can we actually approximate that? Can we learn that deterministically or statistically? And people are trying to do that. For example, with machine learning, to learn how to correct a large scale model for a fine scale component of the same model to get better results. And maybe we can do that. Maybe we don't need to do that. Maybe 4 kilometers solves all our problems with the general circulation and precipitation biases. I kind of think it's not. Certainly from what I've seen, some of these 4-kilometer models still are having things like biases in a double ITCZ. It doesn't go away when you increase resolution. And then to what extent then can we use these regional digital twins of the Earth, which are much more practical and deployable for people? And we can do much more now computationally with ensembles and things like that with those regional models. So next steps, this Lighthouse activity is supporting developments of digital twins and kilometer scale models, links to data and assimilation beyond the physical system. We're seeing accelerated progress, and we're trying to encourage interactions with existing efforts. There's been a lot of work in the atmosphere, some less work in the other spheres, and really trying to bring the communities from weather and climate, regional and global together, because we think that's going to be critical to make progress. Last one's a question, what have we missed? And hopefully that gives you a better sense of what actually one of these digital twins is, and how it's sort of a slightly different take on our existing systems. So hopefully I've answered that question. And I think I'll stop there. So now how do I stop sharing WebEx? Where's the stop sharing button?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, for a very nice presentation. It's really inspiring. So if there are any questions, please raise your hand.
Trying to figure out how I stop sharing the screen.
There should be an orange bar at the top.
It might be useful to keep your slides up just in case questions.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Now I got it. Okay. But I can keep the slides up. Yep.
Ruby.
All right. Hey, how are you? Okay, thank you.
Ruby, long time no see.
Hi, yep. Thank you for the presentation. It's really wonderful. It's great to see a lot of these ideas really discussed and kind of thought through. I have two questions essentially. The first question is about the use of data, because I think digital twin is essential. I mean, using data is essentially a very important part of digital twin. And we often talk about data as simulation, which could be done, I mean, in the context of forecasting, but in the context of climate modeling, is often a little bit more difficult to do. And usually we only use data for evaluation or for some model calibration. So number one, I wanted to hear a little bit more about the use of data. And then my second question is related to uncertainty. I'm a little surprised I did not hear one mention of uncertainty, which obviously even with this kind of kilometer scale model, we have a lot of uncertainty in the models, as well as if we try to predict or project the future, there are these uncertainties, some of that related to internal variability and things like that. So yeah, can you kind of comment a little bit on these two aspects?
Sure. Good questions. I think I did mention uncertainty a number of times, but it's certainly, if I didn't explicitly enough, I'll get to that. I think with data, the whole point of having the system is sort of to take what we've done for reanalysis and expand it out so we can actually go forward with it. And so one aspect of that for climate is bias reduction by looking at things like analysis increments, and also figuring out where uncertainties are largest in our models because we don't actually have data, and figuring out the right types of data to constrain them. The second aspect of that is to be able to initialize these systems for longer term climate prediction, and in that context. So that's particularly critical in the ocean and land surface, and particularly in the ocean, making sure we understand the state of the ocean to get out to sort of decadal scales. But I think a lot of it for climate is really using data in new ways to help us understand how to improve the systems themselves. This paper in Science Advances is a review paper that I co-authored with a number of colleagues that was really eye-opening for me. It was a lot of fun to write because it does sort of think through a lot of these issues. So it's called Model Data Fusion. So I'd encourage you to look at that for more discussion of this. Uncertainty-wise, yes, we definitely need to get a better handle on uncertainty. So one of the aspects of that is dealing with internal variability by running ensembles. One of the advantages of going to a regional digital twin is it makes it much more practical to run on multiple ensemble simulations with setting up with different states of the large-scale system if we can do that. And the other uncertainty aspect is reducing biases in those large-scale systems, because the high-resolution models still have biases. Some of that's done through, I think, through observations and detailed analysis of observations, and even assimilation and seeing where we're going wrong. So I think there's two aspects of uncertainty. One is trying to improve the models, and the other is using the models, of course, in ensemble systems to actually understand the possible states of the system and different modes of internal variability, and how that actually goes all the way into the sort of downstream impacts and applications to get, what's the difference in weather extremes, and can we actually do that? So hopefully that answers the question.
All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Next, Antonita.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Andrew, for this great presentation. This was really, exciting to see these new advances. So I have also a related question to Ruby's, and also a little related to Dylan's question at the beginning. So you mentioned like that in terms of data simulation, there is this discussion of redefining data simulation also for climate. And I can see this point when you think about data simulation for weather, but I think there has been a lot of work, especially on the ocean side, in doing data simulation at timescales that are climate timescales.
Right.
And indeed, there are like ocean reanalysis, like the SERA 20C that was produced by the ECMWF, which is coupled data simulation, of course, at resolutions that are much coarser than what we are seeing here. But so I would like to better understand what do you mean with redefining data simulation?
I think one aspect is using it for the ocean, as you said, and traditionally it hasn't been used as much because it doesn't affect the shorter scales for weather. And it's getting observations and figuring out where we need more observations of the ocean to do that and to motivate the climate scale. The other thing is, for example, I mentioned shallow clouds over the ocean. They're not that important for weather. They're critically important for climate. So the types of data you actually assimilate are slightly different for climate for improving model prediction. And there's not much cloud information that's actually assimilated. I think ECMWF is now using all sky radiances, and a couple other places are starting to, but traditionally it's only been clear sky and atmospheric state of winds and temperature that are assimilated in the atmosphere. And for climate, we could learn a lot more if we actually had, because we have a lot more information on cloud properties, and the assimilation algorithms themselves don't deal well with clouds because they're discontinued. They have discontinuities in the data sets, spatially and temporally. And that's been tough for the algorithm. So I think that's the other aspect of climate, is we really need to get to those sorts of things to be able to understand our models and how we do climate in these systems.
Yeah, thank you.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Makes a lot of, yes, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Next, Sanji.
Yeah, like I had similar question like previous two questions. I'll not ask the same question again. You have already, it's a kind of difficult question to argue, like, what is the data assimilation for the longer term climate simulation? But I think you have already answered it. With respect to practicality, means these data can quickly become large, and how to store it, that becomes a big issue. So is there something like, this is not a question but a comment, why can't you kind of make it a coarse resolution after running the high resolution model? At least that will save the data for the longer term, and then people can see the difference once, like many people can get handle on those coarse data. Would be easy to kind of move it around.
Right. I mean, and this is a related discussion that's starting to happen. But one of the things the Europeans are planning for their digital twin, called Destiny, is to actually have a system where they're not storing the high resolution data. They are basically they're streaming the data to basically a nearby disk, and users will have a certain period of time, from days to weeks to maybe a month, to access the data and process it before it actually disappears, because there's more data filling up that space. So some of that would be traditional data processors that would basically, pull out low resolution data, do climatological analyses. Some of it may be high resolution applications models that would run on the raw data as it was sitting there, and then would produce results. But the raw data itself is going to end up going away. We're not going to save it. I sort of call it, we think of stupid parallelism in models as ways that we can do things at the same, independent on the same different columns. Like physics parameterizations for clouds are stupidly parallel because you can do all the different columns on the same time. The stupid compression algorithm for data is not to write it in the first place. And the way you would do this is you would have a regular schedule of model simulations where every year you're going to do a forecast or prediction. And so every year there's going to be this data streaming for several months. And that's, if you miss this cycle, you get in the next one. And the last aspect of that is it sort of means that we have to think about these systems as being operational now, because climate modeling has traditionally not been operational. Some countries it is operational in the sense that a climate center like the Hadley Center has a task from the government to do climate predictions for the country every so many years. But we really need to think of it in more senses like we think of operational weather prediction. We need to fund it like that. So it's an ongoing activity. It's not a research activity anymore. It probably needs to be moved into a more of a different mode, which is the other aspect of these systems.
Thank you.
Michelle?
Excellent talk. I really enjoyed some of your animations. Made it more real.
Good.
So
That's Andy Prine. That's not me. And some other people.
well, you're shooting them. Anyway, I was curious whether there is some like time scale that you're trying to run these models out to. Does it vary by group? I heard out to 40 days for one simulation, but is that 40 days for everyone, or is it just kind of open-ended at this point? I have another question too after this one.
I think it's open-ended. I think the issue has been availability of computer time and what can actually be done practically. 40 days was a specification for the atmospheric high-resolution diamond simulations, which was done so that you could spin up the atmosphere and get some statistics of a few weather systems. Other spheres, it makes more sense to do other things. And I think, like, for example, for the regionally refined stuff, we were able to run seasons at 3 kilometers, multiple seasons. So getting more into the climate space. I think the timescales will depend on an intersection of the problem size and the availability of compute and how you want to scale that. So the goal is to keep it at 4 kilometers, but part of it is how much of the planet do you want to do and how many ensembles do you need and how much available compute do you have? So I think we're trying to learn, and I think we're in the development stage now where people are either running very short, like 40 days globally, or we're picking individual regimes. And this is one of the things the Digital Earth is probably Lighthouse activity is going to do, is coordinate activities around summertime continental United States mesoscale convective systems. Can we actually do those better in the models? How do we do that? So let's run some shorter term simulations, maybe just regionally to focus on phenomena. Different groups doing that are going to help us improve the models for different things. It's almost like it's basically going over territory that the mesoscale models have already done and trying to cross model scales also run, you know, mesoscale and LES models for the same phenomena. We're trying to run these high resolution global systems. So
That
hopefully
makes
that answers that
a lot
question.
of sense. And then, yeah, so you showed a motivating example, one that is sort of near and dear to my heart about tropical, equatorial tropical biases. I'm
yeah.
just curious whether there's been any research yet that kind of sheds more light on them. Any preliminary results that you can share?
Not yet. I think this is a very active area of research because a lot of these models are having trouble with these weakly force systems in the tropics. It's relatively easy to organize a mesoscale convective system or a squall line with strong forcing. It's harder to organize on multi-scales over long periods of time, the multiple layers of organization of tropical convection, which is also smaller scale because a mesoscale convective complex, you can resolve updrafts at 1 to 3 kilometers. Tropical systems are smaller. They're harder to resolve at those scales. So I think that's the other interesting thing is there's been more focus on weather where it impacts people. The stuff out over the ocean, there's been less impact on, but that's really, or less work on, but that's really important for climate. So that's the other,
yeah,
like,
I mean,
process
that's
that people
meaningful
are
to
spending a lot of
people
time on.
for certain time scales. Yeah, with the
Right.
knock-on
I mean, people have done
teleconnections.
tropical cyclones, but when you're doing teleconnections, it's more of a climate scale. So understanding that multi-scale interaction is what we're really trying to build these models for and figure out what we really need to do and how we need to do it. So that's, I think, one of the first, you know, beyond the eye candy, it's really getting the statistics of tropical systems right and how they feed back on the global circulation.
All right, makes a lot of sense to me. So I guess the next generation of these will be digital triplets.
Probably not. I think they're still they're not in the multiverse yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next, Dylan, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I appreciate the presentation and all the great answers you've given so far to questions. I think you've somewhat answered my question already, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Just returning back to the question about the data and how it's folded into the model. Actually, it's not really about how it's folded in the model. It's more about, I'm trying to understand how you would validate something like this. Because as you mentioned, like the model is going to have its own biases because it's a model. And it's unclear whether those biases are actually an improvement over the course resolution. Well, in some cases, you showed that there is an improvement. But I'm just trying to figure out how you would validate, say, the ocean in this coupled system when we almost certainly have no high resolution observations of the ocean in anywhere.
Right.
And not just like the bulk statistics, like the mean and like standard deviation, but like the time variability of specific features. I mean, if this is supposed to look like the real world, how well did it follow?
So one of
the meandering of the California current, for example.
Yeah. So one of the aspects of the model data fusion is to try to understand where are we missing observations. If we can't constrain a model, if we can't constrain a result we want in the climate system because we don't have the model could look like the data, but we don't have the right data, then we need to go figure out where to get more data. And one of the things these digital twins can be used as sort of like OSSI experiments, observation simulation experiments. Where are the model biases? Where is the data influencing the model or not influencing the model? Where do we need more data? So one of the implications of a digital twin and this sort of model data fusion is using the model to design the future observing system to make sure we can get a better prediction out of it. If that makes sense.
I think it does.
Really,
I guess it seems like there are several different products that are coming from the same framework. And I guess I'm struggling to see how all of the different products are separated from each other. Because in this picture, it looks like everything is coming from the same output, but it sounds like you can use the framework to produce different kinds of output.
Well, you're using the framework and you're using the model for different purposes, and it's different levels of the model abstraction. So for some things, you put out an application space in, you want to output the model state in terms of water and rainfall hitting the surface, but then you actually want to also output not just a liquid water path in the atmosphere, but a microwave, the effective microwave radiance that comes from that. So you can actually figure out, does it look like the observations, or are you getting the right observations that are tied to where the rainfall is in order to improve that rainfall prediction? If that makes sense. So you can, yeah, it's different outputs of the system used in different ways.
I gotcha.
And the advantage of a digital twin is you can kind of probe, if it's a comprehensive enough version of the system, you can probe it in all these different ways without having to build a new system to do it.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I think that helps clarify it. And I guess to Sanjeev's point about the practicality of these data systems, because you mentioned the files are huge. I mean, it makes plenty of sense.
Yeah.
I think we lost you. Oh, okay. You're good.
I'm here. So open
you're
the door.
Good. You had mentioned that you don't save the raw data and that it gets overwritten fairly quickly. Is there utility in interpolating the high resolution for climate scale problems, interpolating the high resolution data to something coarser and more manageable for long-term storage?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, I think this is one model. There are other models. This is sort of one that the Europeans are building. You would also save full high resolution restart files so you could rerun pieces of the system. People are also like looking at, well, can you machine learn the interim? Like, for example, NVIDIA has a version of the ECNW. They've learned the ECNWF reanalysis system, so they can actually produce a forecast that's almost as good as the IFS 5 or 10 days out. You can actually use that to perturb the initial state and generate large ensembles using machine learning, which is much faster. So there are ways of doing other things with these systems in new methods that may actually help us answer uncertainty questions, for example.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Hi.
Thank you, Andrew, for the nice talk. Actually, my question is related to the NVIDIA model. I can think of it as another extreme example of digital twin with no Earth system modeling effort as a pure data model. On the other hand, Diamond can be regarded as a pure Earth system model without constraints of observations. So I wonder whether there are, do you have any ideas in your mind? What would be a nice middle way that we can take? How we can approach this data and model fusion? Like how we can use machine learning, best use machine learning because it's really difficult to run large ensemble with high resolution simulation. What would be the best way to take advantage of machine learning tools and combine both approach?
I don't think we know yet, but I think that's one possible path forward, as I sort of sketched out, is you could potentially use these systems to develop appropriate empirical models, and training data sets and training data. So you could actually then vary the input conditions and develop, ensembles. And for particular applications, it could be, 500 millibar height, but it could also be precipitation at very high resolution at the surface, and how that's linked to the actual physical model and how you do that. So I think there are real opportunities that we're just starting to explore that can link with applications that are going to be used in new ways. But again, the whole point of building these systems is to build a framework that this stuff can plug into so that everybody can be using kind of the same system.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's 3 p.m., but I have one quick question. It's a technical question for Andrew. So assume I have a climbing model 25 kilometer. If I want to run like this 4 kilometer cloud convective permitting model, what I can do, what I need to do to build this configuration?
You probably need 100 times. You first need 100 times more computing power.
Yeah. What I mean is a physics configuration. It's not if we have the computer power.
I think the biggest thing is that 25 to 4 kilometer scale, the deep convection is going to behave differently.
Yeah. We can turn off.
And it may be also the shallow and turbulence is going to behave differently. It shouldn't, but a lot of the stuff is not as scale independent as we think. So we just have to take a look at it. Different systems are going to fail in different ways, and that's what we're learning. So I would say go find your friendly neighborhood mesoscale modeler who knows about the phenomena of interest and convince them that they should help you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Andrew, for your very nice presentation. And we have still made lots of discussion. I believe we need another 1 hour to have more discussion. But we will have a continued discussion in our panel.
And I'm happy to take further comments, and I'm happy to share the slides also if people want to make further comments on it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
They're a little big with those animations, but we'll figure out something.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Andrew.